Hey, this is ROM Hack Guy 764. I love ROM hacks, you love ROM hacks, and I got some new ROM hacks here that'll blow your mind.
Let's get ROM into the hack. That was fucking gay. Let's talk about ROM hacks. Throughout the 90s and even bleeding into the early 2000s, a handful of Japanese games were localized by a company called Working Designs, and the general sentiment is that they're questionable. While not traditionally bad, let's just say they had their own flair, as well as an annoying tendency to tweak mechanics and stats, often to the detriment of the game. In an attempt to mend the ills of the past, one brave soul has stepped up to UnWorking Designs' one of my favourite games, Alundra. Despite what the name may make you think, this doesn't undo all the damage caused, but it does restore the stats from the original Japanese title. When Alundra was localized, all enemies had their health increased, I would say to a factor of at least 2, some significantly higher. I wouldn't say it's a particularly hard game, at least in terms of combat, however some puzzles can be brutal if you're not thinking kinesthetically, so they likely wanted the combat to match the drapes. I'm not usually a fan of making games easier, but hitting the slime guys 5 times to kill them does feel a bit unnecessarily padded. Even with some of the tougher weapons you acquire later in the game, the revised health pools made fighting regular enemies far less tempting. A large crutch of the US version of Alundra is that most bosses have an elemental weakness and can be downed very quickly if you spam magics, and a larger crutch of the European version is that it runs at 50Hz. Disgusting. While the UnWorking Designs mod is still open to magic spam, it's far less tempting to cheese, as playing legitimately no longer feels like a punishment. Overall, it makes the game a little more intentional, a little less time-wasty, but those shield lizards are still a bitch to get around. While not a huge change, and depending on how you feel, not even really an improvement, it's definitely worth considering if you're out for another Alundra play. I'd even recommend it as a first-time thing, and I mean, if you haven't played Alundra at this point, I despise you. Apparently, the dev didn't test past the first boss, so I had to beat the game to ensure that it worked before I recommended it. Yeah, let's go with that. We're all good, it works fine. Play away! In my last ROM hack video, that's right, this is a series now, which means it's going to be 3 years until the next one. I mentioned War of the Goddess, a Breath of Fire mod that fixed up the English a little, but had no major gameplay changes. I felt it was still too easy, despite being entirely readable now. Luckily, in the time since I made that video, a fabled hero of the Light Dragon clan has released a new mod that bumps the difficulty and integrates with the War of the Goddess rewrite as well. I wouldn't say it's definitive yet. For starters, the inventory's still a nightmare and it's functionally still Breath of Fire. However, the bumps to difficulty and the magic tweaks are a nice touch. I'd frequently hit auto battle and get completely wiped by a regular mob, but it's not so hard that I'd be unable to progress had I actually paid attention. The bosses are where this really shines, as even if you accidentally overlevel farming gold slimes, guilty, you can still easily get your ass kicked by foes that used to be complete pushovers. There's a few more things I'd personally change to consider it a definitive version, but overall, it's still an interesting hack, and one that I'd highly recommend. Just don't forget to buy a pack of smokes or two, you'll need them to justify your long, arduous journey. If you know me, and you're not a fake fan, you know that Redux is my favourite Dragon Ball character. He got robbed by anime friendship and absolutely should have become King of Earth by defeating both of Gohan's fathers. Also, he's really wide. Legend of the Super Saiyan is a pretty well-known game for being the Dragon Ball RPG on the Super Nintendo that isn't a visual novel. It's certainly lesser known for being a remake of 2 NES titles, but that's a story for another video. It's a weird game wherein you follow the anime events up to the Namekian genocide, with combat being card-based and only featuring a single stat responsible for almost every parameter. It's charmingly bizarre, and despite following the story closely, it's also open to player decision. For example, there are various ways to keep the Z-Fighters alive during the battle with the Saiyans, which can range from Goku arriving early to simply rounding up the boys before you engage Nappa and having them survive the fight. This means they're available to explore Namek with Gohan and Krillin, which is where this mod comes into play. It character swaps Chaozu for Raditz, changing his character sprite and increasing his battle power, so if you've enough knowledge to keep him alive, you get to access this fantastic fiction, and I live for Dragon Ball fanfic. You know, particularly when Raditz gets pregnant. He's much more useful mid-game as his battle power occasionally surpasses Gohan, though it's not a huge difference. In the original NES versions, Chaozu had a technique which could stun even bosses for a couple seconds, making him objectively the best guy. But that was removed in the remake, and now he can't even stun a fly. He absolutely deserved to be replaced with a man who fucks, and doesn't wear a gay little hat. Saiyan characters get Zenkai boosts if they hit critical health and are healed, and while it's not implemented for Raditz currently, the creator did mention that he'd like to add it in the future. What I'd also recommend looking into is the events after Guru gives everyone a power boost, because Raditz turns back into Chiaotzu at that point, and I missed my tree trunk-legged boy. While it doesn't change a lot and only works for half the game, it seems like early days for mods, and if we know anything about Dragon Ball Z fans, if they can do it, they will do it, so I'm excited to see what the future brings. I'll be watching this scene very closely. Also, please add Nappa as a playable character. He is somehow even wider than Raditz. Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions Emergence. The name on this guy. As you can tell from the name, this hack uses the PSP version as a base, which was an interesting patching experience, as I didn't read that part of the description and was trying to brute force it on the PS1 version. I'm not low IQ, I swear. Now, let me dispel your pre-questions. Yes, this has the slowdown removal included in its list of features, and despite being a fairly vanilla experience, said list is girthful. There are some quality of life improvements, including character progression, as the class tree's been shuffled around, and it makes a little more sense now. For example, Dragoons are born of soldiers instead of thieves, which is a no-brainer. Ninjas need to pass Chemistry 101, and, there's plenty of other examples. You don't need me to give you the full list, it's on the website, in the description. Thieves and samurai can use crossbows and bows respectively, as they're a little more reliant on archers this time around, which again makes sense not to offer an upgrade that's entirely unrelated to its predecessor. If I spent 5 hours crooning through a class, you'd want the follow-up to at least lean on it a little bit. Squires have a few more basic tools, such as the oil ability, which increases fire damage, and other stuff. They're actually kinda useful now. While I'm not incredibly familiar with the original game, I've definitely been using classes that I'd never even considered viable before, which I would say make it a successful ROM hack. Enemies play by new rules. I've never seen so many characters confused in a single skirmish before. Mostly my team. Maybe I've just had amazing luck in the past, but I've never specifically changed my equipment to prevent status ailments or overly relied on them myself, yet in Emergence they often feel necessary. The creator said that it keeps a similar level of difficulty to the OG, and I'd agree for the most part, but certain areas kicked the shit out of me, which then forced me to pursue alternate methods of progress such as status ailments. The original game is pretty easy to stat roll, even with scaling levels, so I could do a heap of damage to a guy, or I could burn a turn on an ailment that might not even work and hope for the best. In most battles, there's clearly a better approach, but in this iteration, it very rarely feels like that. As it's a largely vanilla experience in terms of narrative and whatnot, this ROM hack stands as a chill replay of an already amazing game. I highly recommend it. That's right, Goof Troop has modding tools now. Life's finally worth living. Goof Troop ST, or Space Treasure, is a mod. There are a few glowing reviews of it on the ROM hacking page, but I thought it was just okay. The first 3 levels don't feel too far removed from the base game. It felt kinda the same. Same general progression, same level theme, same enemies, same puzzles, same bosses. However, this all changes when you hit the 4th stage, and you go to space to get the treasure. These levels have new tiles and some genuinely interesting puzzle layouts, which I'd say justify the lackluster first half. I was playing co-op with my boy Liam from the YouTube channel Droopy Pie. Incredibly underviewed creator, go check him out. Links everywhere, that's Dropped, D-R-O-P, you'll find him. Anyway, we were underwhelmed with the first half and flew through it with only a few N-bombs dropped, but when we got to stage 4, everything changed. We were throwing them out like we'd just achieved hypermelination. We focused, we buckled our space belts, we got real sweaty, and had to bring up Photoshop to do some tandem puzzle solving. It was pretty cool. It was what a new Goof Troop experience should be, and it played particularly well with 2 players. Some of the puzzles almost felt made for the multiplayer experience, which was never something it could go too hard on, as the single player doesn't change the room layouts. The bosses, despite having a few tweaks, were almost identical, which was a pretty big disappointment, but they were also the worst part of the base game as well, so it's not a huge issue. Upon some more reflection, I just want to add that despite the overall game not feeling too far removed from the original, that could be seen as a positive. If you consider that it's well crafted enough to potentially be from the base game, and you want more of that, well, here it is. For me to give it a glowing review, I'd want it to really strike out and be its own thing, but I still enjoyed it and was very impressed by what's on offer. I never thought I'd talk about a Pokemon ROM hack. I dig them every now and again, but they get enough coverage. However, this one really took me by surprise. Pokemon Clover is the end result of weaponized autism, and I don't say that to disparage anyone, it's meant as a compliment, and while it's far from perfect, it's incredibly refreshing. For starters, every Pokemon was created by the VP board on 4chins, and most of the dialogue and events are references to distasteful happenings, but that's a part of its charm. It's edgy, but not for the sake of being edgy. It's a chronicle of time past, a fun time you used to be able to have on the internet, wrapped in a neat Pokemon experience. The custom mons are crazy good, and given that there were clearly no hard restrictions, the creativity here is unmatched. Some got a legitimate chuckle out of me, like I lost it when I saw the starters Grasshole and Arabomb, and check this guy. The music is on point and generally a reference to classic internet memes. The early maps are stuff you'd find in an actual Pokemon game, and the later maps are, let's say, dense. Battles are tough. Some of the late game enemies use sweaty strats, and it's impossible to grind past it because experience yields are pathetic and the game's gated pretty hard. I've read that if you use cheats, it will straight up delete your save before the credits roll and lock you out of endgame content. You know, you get what you deserve. That's not the only way you get screwed either, as you can skip some gym leaders. I think the ones that don't have HM requirements, but I'm not 100% sure. The only one I personally experienced was Brock, who kept destroying me, so I ran through to Misty, clapped her, and attempted to head back, only to find that he had an endgame team of level 60 plus dudes, and they opened by buffing themselves. Brock allows you to use Flash, and there are 2 areas you have to brute force, blind as a bat, before you're powerful enough to go back and take him. Honestly, I deserved it, and walked right into it. There's a couple annoying parts, like the stealth section in Lavender Town, where you've got to dodge skeletons or you get sent down a level, but I also kinda dig that stuff. Despite being annoying, I'll always remember getting filtered by randomly spinning NPCs, and that's the kind of shit Nintendo's not brave enough to put its players through, which is why Pokemon is such a forgettable experience. Overall, one of the best Pokemon ROM hacks I've played. The execution's a little rough, but it's without a doubt the most memorable, unique Pokemon experience I'll likely ever have, and can you believe they did it for free? Can you think of a single game that needed a ROM hack more than Quest 64? You can. But surely we can agree that Quest 64 is up there, right? While it doesn't change a whole lot, it's still Quest 64. There's a bunch of quality of life improvements that were a part of a randomizer or something, and it ends up marginally better than the vanilla experience, which is ironic given the name, because there's nothing refined about the French. For starters, the base stats are increased to make the early game a little less punishing. Magic was tweaked to make every element viable, and items now pay out in droves, making healing and auxiliary effects far more accessible. The base game also has issues with accuracy being tied to your agility stat and boss attacks disabling buffs, which makes them useless, and those as well have been mended. As these improvements come from a randomizer tool, they're customizable, so you can fine-tune your next Quest 64 playthrough, which I know you're just dying to do. Instead of falling back on the old water, earth, ball, and chain, I decided to go wind and fire this time, and I managed pretty well. I'd still use water for out-of-battle healing, but wind is great, and, fire helps. Keeps me warm. I did get filtered against the penultimate boss and was kicking myself for not getting Magic Shield, which prevents all damage, but let's say it's a skill issue and move on. People have historically been harsh toward this title, and for good reason. Most maps are long, empty hallways, the magic and combat are anything but balanced, and the encounter rate? Oh boy! However, the reaction has always been overblown. There are far worse RPGs, even on the same system. This game is annoying, yes, but it's playable, and, the first third's pretty fucking comfy. While the French vanilla mod doesn't fix Quest 64, it shows there's a dedicated group of people who are at least down to make it better, and it's nice seeing an attempt on a game that cops a lot of shit, but only deserves most of it. A dude called Clovis is intensely obsessed with this game, and for good reason. It is amazing, but what's even more amazing is that he made a mod for it. One issue I had with the OG was that it felt like a lot of systems went unexplored because there wasn't enough time or incentive. Changing deck leaders for their abilities took so many battles that by the time you had a monster good enough to use as a leader, you'd have already beaten the game. Also, you could very easily clear it without this system at all. Deck building often came down to using the code to get yourself an Aqua Dragon and destroying about 90% of foes with one critter. The other 10% would be victim to a Barrel Dragon. Functionally, the only change it needed was a reason to delve into the depths a little more, and that's what this mod allows you to do. I started by picking the Lancaster side and got repeatedly destroyed. I couldn't even beat the first guy, so I took a look at the readme file and it explicitly said to side with the Yorkers first. I'm passing this information on to you, so you don't make the same mistakes that I did. I tend to avoid readmes if I can because I like new experiences to be as surprising as possible, but, sometimes that does backfire. There are too many small changes to detail. If you want a list of them all, I'll link the creator's channel in the description. Dude's got hour-long videos going over changes, the processes behind it, and even playthroughs, which is amazing. I love the dedication and commitment to breathing new life into such a fantastic title, and to be so transparent about the creation is very welcome. Now, it doesn't add anything new, but it taps into previously inaccessible content and changes what's on offer to such an extent that it almost feels like a sequel. It also includes uncensored content, which is pretty nice. If you ever wanted more Duelist of the Roses, and I'm starting to believe that people actually do outside of just myself, you know where it is. Go and draw your destiny. This video has taken me so long to write and edit, and not because it's a long or a complex video, I'm just really lazy. Anyway, since I've kind of been working on it, I played a couple other good entries, but I can't be asked retrofitting them into the video itself, so let's do a bonus lightning round. Tactics Ogre One Vision is a rework of the PSP version of Let Us Cling Together. It's slick, it's what the re-remake should have been, and not just number bloating and horrible filters. Guests who used to have stupid AI are now controllable, there's a ton more equipment giving it a more gradual progression curve, and the enemies seem poised to actually want to defeat you, because I don't think they were trying before. I love the PSP remake, but it was a very easy game, and One Vision pushed me back out of my comfort zone, and for that, I love it. Also, Stone Toss actually does damage now and comes packing a stupidly high accuracy rate, it truly doesn't miss. In the base game, rocks do 1 damage, and I don't know if you've ever been hit by a rock before, but it certainly does more than that. Moving along, we've got Link's Awakening Redux, a mod that's allegedly a collection of a few quality of life changes, and boy does it ever change lives. I hate the font they chose, but the fact that I can walk into a rock or pick up a power triangle thing and not get mandatory text box makes this game 100 times better. Also, it changes other shit, but who cares about that? I'm just chuffed about the rocks. Like, legitimately, every time in the future I'm going to replay this game, it's going to be this version. It's sick. Next up, another Pokemon one, but this requires a severe level of exceptionalism. It's Vanilla Fire Red, but on every step your Pokemon take 1 damage, like a perpetual poison, and it's incurable. You might think this sounds easy as you can buy healing, but the psycho who made it also removed all healing from stores, and you've got to figure out how to beat the game while counting every single step, which is way more than you'd think. It took me a good couple hours just to make it to Pewter City, and then a day or so to clear Mount Moon, but I was hooked on it, I couldn't stop playing. It's incredibly rewarding when you figure out a surefire method to progress. However, it's still highly RNG dependent, so you want to bring the patience of a saint. Or save states. Speaking of, it's very easy to softlock, so if you are mental enough to attempt it, make many saves. This is my call to action. It's not going to be, subscribe to Casp, no. Go check these people out, go find them, go download their shit, go tell them they're great. Go give them money if they've got an option. They're amazing, they make amazing shit, and I love it, and you should too. On your bike, son!